Hello, I'm David, and I wanted to talk to you today about a subject which is probably dear to your heart, which is anxiety and panic attacks. Before I start, I should mention that I don't have any medical training as such. Everything I have learned about anxiety and panic has come through my own experience and from what I've researched through books and various other means over the years. Now, I've known about anxiety and panic since I was 18, which was 42 years ago, which so you can work out how old I am. That's not to say that I've suffered from anxiety and panic attacks throughout that time, because I haven't. But I did have a very early experience of anxiety and panic when I was in my teens, and I'm sure that many of you will be able to relate to it in a moment when I tell you my story. Now, many of you out there have probably spent a lot of time searching the internet, searching through books, any place you think you can find out what it is that's wrong with you and what has actually happened to you. This is especially true if you've just had your first panic attack, and the memory of that is probably very intense, and it's not something you're likely to forget. But above all, you want to know what you can do about it, and if you can actually be cured of it. And I'm here to tell you that you can. I can't say that I consider myself cured, even after all these years, but I'm not far off it. Now, I think the best place for me to start will be to actually tell you the story of my own first panic attack, because even though it was a long time ago, I can still remember every detail as clear as though it was yesterday. But I think some of you might be able to relate to what actually happened to me at the time. Now, this was in February in 1972. I was working in an office at that time. It was actually the Met Office in Bracknell in Berkshire. It was the headquarters, and I'd been working there for about 3 years. And it was just an ordinary working day. It was a Thursday. It was just before lunch, and I was about to head upstairs to have my dinner in the canteen, which was 3 floors up. And on this day, I waited around for a lift to come so I could save me climbing all the stairs, but there was no lift. So after a few minutes of waiting, I got fed up, and I thought, well, I'll go up the stairs. I ran up the stairs, which was uncharacteristic behaviour for me, as I used to speed around anywhere. By the time I got to the top, I was a bit out of breath. Anyway, I carried on, went to the canteen, got my dinner, and took it over to sit down with a friend I used to sit with at dinner times. And we used to talk about the weather, because we're great weather fans. And I put my dinner down on the table, sat down, and before I had the chance to start, I suddenly felt very, very sick, very nauseous. It just came out of nowhere. And I thought, what's happening? Why is this happening now? But I very quickly realised that I wasn't going to be able to eat my dinner. And fearing the worst, I quickly took my dinner back to the counter and headed off outside to the nearest toilet, which luckily was outside. I went in there and shut myself in. But by this time, not only was I feeling sick, but I was absolutely terrified. I was shaking like a leaf. My heart was thundering, absolutely pounding faster than I'd ever known it before. and my mouth was dry, and I was just breathing so fast I was panting. So I stood there locked in, thinking, what in God's name is happening to me? I was used to anxiety. I mean, I'd been an anxious person all my life, and I was used to knowing what the feeling of fear was like. Just, the sudden whoosh, flash of fear that goes through you sometimes. And I'd had plenty of those in my day. But this was something very, very different. It was an intensity of fear that I didn't know was possible. So I stood there, shaking and trembling, and I wasn't sick. I was just nearly, gagged a couple of times, but that was as close as it got. And I just stood there thinking, how on earth am I going to get out of this? What is happening, and what am I going to do about it? So I stood there just shaking and trembling, and I knew from my previous experience of anxiety that it usually, just calms down eventually. But I stood there for half an hour, and it still wasn't calming down. Well, it calmed down a little, but, not like it was used to. So I stayed there for half an hour and waiting, seeing what was going to happen. And eventually I calmed down enough, and I thought, well, I can't stay in here all dinner time. I can't just lock myself in. So I made a run for it, and I headed downstairs 2 flights to the next toilet. And then I stayed in that toilet for half an hour as well. Well, I just tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. Anyway, I eventually calmed down enough. I thought, well, I've got to leave. I can't stay at work feeling like this. So I knocked myself, went down to my office, gathered my coat up, and just ran for it, basically. Went outside. And I felt better for being out in the fresh air. I mean, I felt so, although I wasn't, shaking and trembling so much, I felt very weak and very exhausted and drained, like I'd just run a marathon or something. I just felt so tired. But I thought, well, I've got to get myself back. So in those days, I used to live in what were called lodgings. There was a elderly lady that looked after myself and another chap. We both worked in the town, and she used to give us a room and cook our meals. And because I was staying away from home, working where I was, so I went back there. I thought, well, I can't really stay here. I think I'll just have to go home. So I walked in, and she said, "What's up with you? You don't look too good." I said, "Well, no, I'm not." I said, "I don't know what's happened, but I don't feel very well, so I think I better go home." I gathered up my things and just made my way to the train station. I did stop just to phone in, to tell the office where I was, and say I wasn't well, so I was going home. But I got my train back, and the journey back home was like some sort of weird dream. I spent the whole time, spent the whole time trying to figure out what on earth had just happened to me, because I had nothing I could really compare it to. I mean, yes, like I said, I'd been afraid, but there was nothing like this ever. When I got home, I told my parents I was living with that what had happened. I said that, I couldn't go to work. I needed some time off. So this was Thursday. I thought, well, the obvious thing to do is to get a doctor's appointment and see if he can explain it. So that wasn't going to be until Monday. That was the earliest appointment I could get. So I went through the next 3 or 4 days, just, in a kind of just generally apprehensive state. I spent most of the time just thinking about what had happened and what it meant. And I thought, well, hopefully the doctor can tell me and explain what happened and, put my mind at rest. So anyway, Monday came around, I went along to the doctor. I explained exactly what happened. And he sort of squinted at me, and then he did what doctors do. He checked my glands, and he looked at my ears, and he said, "Oh, you've just got flu." I thought, flu? Flu? When was flu ever like that? I said, "Well, yes, but..." Well, I tried to start to explain myself again, but he wasn't interested in listening. He said, "Yes, you'll be all right. You'll be all right in a week or so." He gave me a certificate, stay home for a week. So I thought, well, that's not right. There's something he's not telling me. So I took the certificate and went home, and see, it was. I tried very hard to think how flu could possibly have been like that, and it just didn't make any sense. I thought, I'd had flu a few years before, and I knew exactly what it felt like. I'd had rather bad bout of flu, but it was certainly nothing like that. So for the whole of that week, I kind of drifted around. I didn't feel like doing anything. I just sort of mooched around, sat around, tried to watch the TV, but I was just distracted the whole time. I just couldn't concentrate on anything. And I thought, well, normally, if I'd just been ill with some virus or some other complaint, I would have just sort of sat around and waited for things to get better. But although I didn't have any more panic, I just felt so anxious all the time, just so frightened of something which I couldn't really name. It was just a horrible, apprehensive feeling. And anyway, I sort of plodded through that week, and I got to the next weekend. I thought, well, I don't really feel up to going back to work. So I managed to get another appointment with the doctor on the Monday, and I went along and explained again. I said, well, he said, well, sometimes it takes longer to get over these things, and just give it another week and then you should be all right. So he still wouldn't say any more than it was just flu, and I thought, well, I'm not getting very far here. Anyway, I went back home, and I again drifted through another week, waiting and thinking and worrying, and thinking, well, shall I go back to work or shan't I? But come the weekend, I thought, well, I just can't sort of drift along like this. I better do something. So I did decide that I'd have to go back to work on the Sunday, which involves a long train journey from where I lived back to Bracknell. And I managed to get myself on the train and back there. But when it came to Monday and I went into work, and the anxiety really started to kick in then, just being back there again. And this was February, so it was very stuffy and warm in the office and cold outside. Everything felt airless, oppressive. I couldn't really talk to people. I didn't feel like talking to people at all. And I couldn't concentrate on my work. I kept well clear of the canteen. I didn't go anywhere near there, because I certainly didn't want a repeat performance. And the week just dragged on, and I was longing for it to be Friday. Finally, Friday came around, and I thought, well, I made it through a week, but I didn't feel any better at all. In fact, I felt worse. I felt more scared than when I'd started. I thought, well, maybe I can, recover a bit over the weekend. It came to Sunday, and it came to going back for another week of it, and I got on the train, and I had to go via London, through two mainline stations in London, to get to Bracknell. And heading down to London on the first part of the trip, I stood up because I wanted to get some air. I had this thing about getting enough air, because I just felt like I wasn't breathing properly. If I was in a stuffy, closed-in place, I didn't feel as though I could breathe. So I stood by an open window at a door in the days when you could open windows on trains. And as I got further and further on my trip and nearer and nearer to London, I started to get really, really anxious. And inside I was churning and churning and churning, and I thought, how can I possibly go back to work feeling like this? And I sort of agonised over it for about an hour of the trip. It was about an hour. And by the time the train pulled into London, I was in such a state. I thought, no, I can't do this. I just can't go through with it. So I got off the train, and I thought, all right, I'm just going to have to go back home. So I can remember that so clearly when I stood on that platform in London's King's Cross, which is a very busy station. There was people all around me, there was noise, it just felt like a horrible kaleidoscope of sounds and images, and I just felt like it was all closing in on me. But somehow or other, I managed to find my way to the ticket office, and I got a single ticket. And found the train back home, and got on it and stood by the window again, open window. And after a few minutes, finally, the train was on its way back. I thought, thank God, for a certain measure of relief, that I was going back home again. Anyway, it stopped a few miles outside of London. It suddenly stopped, and I thought it was just a station. But then it was there 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 50 minutes. Oh, God, I thought, please, what's happening? Can't I just get home? And then finally the announcement came over the tannoy in the train saying, we regret to inform passengers that this train has broken down. Would all passengers please alight and catch blah, 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 the train on the other platform. Oh, please, why does this have to happen now of all times? So I thought, well, I've got to get home. I just lugged my suitcase all across the station. I don't even remember what the station was. And found the right train and got on it. And it was a horrible train. It was, it was like a weird sort of bus or coach inside. The seating arrangement was all like that. And there was no corridors and no place you could stand and just breathe in the fresh air from outside. And I thought, well, I've got to get home, so this is the only way I can do it. And I got on it and sat down. And finally the train lurched into motion. Like I'd done previously, I got myself rather out of breath running across to the train. And then it started again, just like it had done in the canteen. Waves and waves of nausea. And please, not now, all times. Why is this happening now? I thought, am I going to stay in this train for an hour or more? Because it was a slow train, it was stopping at every station. And panic kicked in big time, and I went through all that I'd been through before in the canteen and in the toilet, only worse. I thought, well, I've got to do something. What am I going to do? I thought, well, I have to try and take my mind off it. So I fumbled around in my bag, found a paperback book. I thought, well, I'll try reading something, maybe that'll take my mind off it. But I didn't read it. I just kept turning the pages and scanning it and wondering if I was going to make it through the trip without being sick. I should mention that, as far as that goes, I've always been kind of phobic about it all my life, being sick. I don't know why it happened or what started it. But the prospect of that happening in front of a load of people on a train was just pretty grim, so my fear just grew even worse. Anyway, I sat there and scanned my book and waited, and I wasn't sick. I just felt very sick, like I was going to any second. But finally, I recognised that we're nearly back to the station. I had to get off it, and I thought, thank God for that. And I stood up by the door a few minutes before it arrived and pulled the window down. I thought, oh, fresh air. And then as the train was pulling in, I opened the door, I leapt off the train and nearly fell over because the train was still moving. And then I gathered my wits and composed myself and just stood there on the platform for a couple of minutes as the train pulled away, and suddenly the silence was kind of overpowering. And it was kind of weird. It was just a eerie, unreal feeling I had there. And finally, I kind of gathered my wits and I went out and found a taxi and got a taxi back home. And I explained to my mum and dad, I tried to do it as calmly as I could. I felt ill again and I just couldn't go back to work. But all the preceding weeks, all the pent-up feelings that I kept inside was suddenly just, I couldn't hold it in any longer, and I just burst into tears and I cried and cried for about half an hour, just to let it all out. I mean, my mum and dad were quite shocked because they didn't really understand why I was so upset. Anyway, that was that episode, and the weeks that followed that were the worst weeks I'd ever experienced in my entire life. I shall explain it. I shall tell you about that in the next recording because it was quite remarkable what happened to me. And during that time, I basically found my own cure, which did cure me at the time. Now, I'm sure many of you will have a similar story to tell about your first panic attack, because, like I said, that just is engraved on your memory. It's probably the worst experience that you have had in your entire life, quite possibly in many cases. And like me, no doubt you were totally bewildered and unprepared for it and couldn't really explain it. You might have had an idea that it was fear-related, obviously, but it was unlike any fear that you may have known before. And this above all is the thing that makes it so hard to describe to people who've never had it. That they just, people who've never had a panic attack always think, if you explain that you are very, very scared, they just think in terms of what they know about fear, which is just the ordinary anxiety that everybody's felt at some point. And if you try and explain the intensity, they just cannot comprehend it because they try and equate it to what they've known in their own lives. So basically, in other words, they don't understand how serious it felt and how bad you felt because there's nothing they can compare it to. They just think, oh, he was just afraid. He just had, got frightened. But it's more than that. It's far more than that. You feel as if your whole life is being threatened. I mean, when it's happening, you fear all sorts of terrible things are going to happen to you. You think you're going to at least collapse or go mad or even die. I mean, it feels that serious. It feels that intense. And this is something that people who've never had it cannot understand. And that includes many doctors, I should say, because I've spoken to many doctors over the years. And I don't think there's a single one of them that has really ever had that experience, so they cannot really relate to it. So, I mean, that is one of the first problems you have to face when you try and seek a solution to your panic problem. It's just trying to convince people that, this is something serious that you experienced and you want to know what it was and what to do about it, obviously. Now, I want to talk about something called sensitization. Now, the way I use it has a very specific meaning, and if you look up sensitization on the internet, you're going to find all sorts of different versions of what it means. But sensitization, in the sense I'm talking about, is a state where our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, the one that produces all the symptoms of fear and regulates all our bodily processes, it's not something we have any conscious control over. It's where that nervous system gets so tired that it starts to produce very intense feelings. And it produces intense feelings that can come very, very quickly. Now, anybody is capable of getting into that state of sensitization, and it invariably follows a long, long period of stress of one sort or another. Continuous, relentless stress in your external life, like, for example, people, students who are studying or trying to get grades, or under pressure to do something. I mean, that's probably a very common cause. People in school or in college or in university can find that kind of pressure building. And finally, it reaches a point where it has to release all this tension you've been building up inside of yourself, and it produces a panic attack. Now, a panic attack is actually literally the worst fear you can feel, and the body creates it when you feel as if your very life is being threatened. It's a kind of emergency measure your body takes, and it's designed to either make you run, get the hell out of wherever it is you are, or with all the adrenaline that it produces in your body, it's going around your body, it makes you strong so that you can fight. And this is why you get all these different symptoms associated with it, like the difficulty in breathing. I mean, there's plenty of information on the internet that describes why each of these different symptoms actually occurs. I mean, there's a, a logical reason for every one of them. But the thing is, with a panic attack, when it comes for no obvious reason, as it did with me, completely out of blue, it's not as if I had anything to be frightened of. And that is what upsets people the most, because they cannot find a reason for it. There is nothing in their environment that could have caused them to be that frightened, generally speaking. I mean, that's how it happens with a lot of people. So, naturally, it's going to make them feel confused, bewildered, upset, and they're going to brood about it, just as I had. I brooded about it for so long. And it's going to make them try and find out what it was that happened and how on earth you can stop it happening again. Now, by its very nature, because of the way you fear it happening again, it's inevitable that you will experience it again. Because by this time, in this sensitized state, your body reacts, like I said, in an exaggerated way, so even the tiniest little thing, like somebody slamming a door or a sudden noise of some kind, can make you jump and set off a panic attack, because your nerves are in such a heightened state of alert. Now, that state of sensitization is not properly covered in the literature about it. There's one notable exception, of course, and that's Claire Weeks, which I shall talk about later, Dr. Claire Weeks. But for most people, they don't understand that state even exists. I mean, they can recognize, yes, if their nerves are bad, if they're excessively jumpy, but you can be in that state and not necessarily succumb to panic. You can be sensitized and still manage to continue and function. So anyway, that is how many people end up having the first panic attack after weeks, months, sometimes years of stress. And once they have had one, like I said, they fear the next. And when the next one comes, of course, they fear that. Oh no, not again, like I did when I was on the train. And it's obviously that's how the cycle starts. You've had a panic attack, you fear the next one comes, you fear one after that, and so on. It goes round and round and round. And the more you fear it, the more likely you are for one to happen. Of course, because if you want a sort of simple definition of panic is fear of itself. You're frightened of the panic, which is what creates the panic in the first place. Not the initial one that was just emergency reaction because your body was overstressed. But subsequent panics are as a result of you fearing them. Now, there's some other factor which I've come to the conclusion of over many years. I mean, I've had panic attacks right up until this current day. I mean, not all the time. I've learned now through what I've experienced and through what I've read and heard how to deal with them. And so panic is not something I dread and fear like I used to. I mean, I do occasionally get them. And I explain one thing which I found to be a reason why a panic attack can be triggered, and it goes right back to my first experience of it. I mentioned about how when I was going to the canteen I was breathing too fast. Now, in some situations, there's one thing to be out of breath through exercise, but there are other situations where you're just breathing too fast anyway. And I suppose a lot of you know what it is. It's hyperventilation, that's what it's called. Now, what happens with hyperventilation is that your levels of carbon dioxide in your body get lower and lower. There's too much oxygen in your bloodstream. And this sets off a kind of a chain reaction within your autonomic nervous system. And if this carbon dioxide gets too low, it can actually trigger a panic attack. Now, that, to me, is what happened to me the very first time I had it. It wasn't just that I was out of breath through running up the stairs. I was actually breathing badly anyway. I continued to breathe badly after I'd finished the exercise of running up the stairs. And I wasn't aware of this at the time, but because I'd done what I'd done, I just, run up flights of stairs, and I continued to breathe too quickly, it triggered the panic response. It triggered my body to produce a panic attack, and that's what came of all the nausea and all the other symptoms that I had. Same thing again happened when I went to get that train. Now, I've seen this happen to myself so many times over the years that I don't doubt it as being a reason for triggering a panic attack. I mean, there are all sorts of reasons why panic can be triggered. Physical reasons. It's not the only one. But it's certainly, from what I know from my own experience and what I've read about, it's quite a common one. And so that explains in physical terms how panic can happen, and as does sensitization, how that can contribute to panic attacks happening. But the thing is, there are so many. If you search through on the internet, you search for answers, trying to find how to cure panic attacks. There are countless people out there claiming to be able to cure panic attacks, be able to cure your anxiety, or in many cases with doctors, they're not interested in explaining what had happened to you. They're more interested in just simply prescribing a medication to take which will stop your anxiety and your panic. Well, that seems to be a fairly common approach, certainly in my experience. Take some pills and you'll feel better. Well, obviously, for many people, medication, when they're in a really bad state, they do need something, and I've done it so myself when I've really been bad. But it does not get to the root of the problem. It does not cure you of anxiety. So there needs to be a cure other than medication, and there is one, and I found it, and I'll show you where I found it and how I've used it in my own life. But in the meantime, please feel free to comment on what I've just said, by all means. I mean, I will try and answer any questions. Like I say, my history with this subject, it goes back a long way, so I've probably experienced many of the things you have in my life. But I'd like to just finish this segment by saying, well, whatever you feel like now, however frightened you are, however desperate you are, There is a cure out there, and you're going to find it the same way I did. So, until the next time, thanks for watching and thanks for listening.